So the cat is out of the bag. Erling Haaland will be a Manchester City player next season. So let's take a deep dive into what that actually means alongside Craig Burley and Mark Ogden. And Craig, we know Pep Guardiola loves a 4-3-3. And this season, after not getting Harry Kane, he's played very successfully without a number 9. How does Haaland's arrival change things for Pep and for Manchester City from next season?
Well, it just gives him another option, doesn't it? And I suppose in some sense it adds even more pressure to deliver the Champions League. It looks like they're probably going to win the Premier League this season, though there's a couple of big hurdles still to go over for City after Liverpool's hard-fought win yesterday. But yeah, I mean, I suppose the bigger players you sign, the more pressure there is. And there's always pressure on the top managers. But I mean, Erling Haaland has been arguably, along with Kylian Mbappe, the most sought after player in the last 18 months. So in terms of what it'll do to the team, I think people quickly forget that City were pretty successful with a guy called Sergio Aguero, even under Pep Guardiola. So, you know, I've read some stuff about, well, he's not really a link-up player. He's not this. He's not that. Blah blah blah. Aguero wasn't either, really. I mean, he would link up. He would link up, but he wasn't. You know, he wasn't a De Bruyne or a Foden or a Mahrez or somebody like that. He was a natural striker, and so I think what it does, it gives Guardiola the option to rotate things and have a natural finisher when needed.
Mark Ogden, there's a couple of really good articles on ESPN FC, one by yourself, one by Gab Marcotti, with more of a kind of historical look at this transfer, because it's not a deal that's just come about over the last couple of months, is it?
No, I mean, this deal has been, I think, from the moment he signed for Borussia Dortmund in 2019, this deal has been in play, you know, not just for Man City, but I think a lot of the clubs, I think Man United, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Chelsea, they were all looking to sign Erling Haaland, and it was a case of just waiting for his release clause to come into play. Now, over the years and months, those teams have fallen away to pretty much leave it between Real Madrid and Man City over the last 6 months, and it looked like Real Madrid were going to get him because everyone that you speak to was telling that Haaland wanted to sign for Real Madrid. And then there came this suggestion that with Mbappe there, they might kind of get in each other's way for the Ballon d'Or, which sounds faintly ridiculous that two players would put a Ballon d'Or over anything else. But so City seem to take advantage of that, and I think they can offer him, you know, as good a guarantee as winning trophies as any club can, certainly domestic trophies. Big money, play with Pep Guardiola. It's one of those moves that when you look at it, if you take a step back, it does make a lot of sense. Although I do think that at some point, Erling Haaland will want to play for one of these historic elite clubs. And that's no disrespect to Man City, because they're not a Real Madrid, a Barcelona, a Man United, a Bayern Munich, a Liverpool. They're winning things, but they're not in that league of iconic clubs. Not yet, anyway. Haaland might be the guy that makes that difference. But I think, so the only surprise that is going for a club that is not in that super club bracket just yet. But I think everything else makes sense. In terms of how he plays, how he fits in, that will be interesting because, you know, like Craig said, City did well with Aguero as a centre forward, but there were times when Pep dropped Aguero. I remember a game in Barcelona, and Aguero was not happy at all that he was being left out to accommodate other players to fit Pep's tactics. And I think it'll be interesting if Pep decides at any point to tell Erling Haaland, look, it's a big game this, but you're not playing. I don't think he's quite mature enough yet as a player to accept that. So that'll be an interesting pivot if that happens.
The other thing I wanted to talk about, Mark, was some people have said, oh, injuries, and he's missed a few games this season. He's only started 20 games for Borussia Dortmund. We forget he's only 21. He doesn't turn 22 until the summer. So as someone who played 27 games last season, or started 27, 11 the season before for Dortmund, is there a concern that it's 38 games in the Premier League? Could he play in all 38? Or is it a case at Man City, no one plays in all 38, maybe apart from Ederson, because it's a squad that Pep's building because he's competing in 4 different championships, the league and the cups?
This is a really interesting point, this, because whenever you kind of raise those questions or you kind of point out that there may be an issue with his fitness or just question the move, you get criticised for being negative and writing it off. But, you know, our job is to be to scrutinise and to interrogate the moves. We can't just be cheerleaders saying this is the best move ever for Man City and the Premier League. And I think it's a valid point about his age and his fitness. Now, I think Haaland is a big, strong centre forward. I don't think there's any concerns over his fitness. But on the flip side, we have to say that certain players, Michael Owen, for instance, Robbie Fowler, these players were sensational late teens, early 20s, but then the injuries caught up with them. And by the time they hit the mid-20s, they were nothing like the players that they were going to be. Now, I'm not saying that Erling Haaland that will happen to him, but yes, he had injuries last season, and we have to see how he gets on. He's still growing. He's not fully developed yet, or it looks like he is. So that is an important factor in his development. Now, I think at City, you're right. They've got such a big squad that he won't play every game. But the flip side is, in the Premier League, you're playing all those competitions, probably a game every 4 days, and he'll want to play. He won't want to be sat on the bench for 20 games a season. Because he's young, he'll want to play every week. So there could be a bit of friction there. But as I say, I'm not saying that Erling Haaland is 21, he's reached his peak because all the injuries are going to slow him down. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying that we have seen players of that age and that explosiveness hit a wall in the mid-20s because they play too much, they have injuries when they're young. It's how he's managed from this point on.
Craig, right now, there's 2 tiers in the Premier League. There's City and Liverpool, and there's the rest. Is this a signing, Erling Haaland, for Manchester City, that could separate City from Liverpool and take them to the next level?
I've got a question for you. There was 2 articles on ESPN.com you mentioned at the top between Ogden v Marcotti. Which one was the best?
Ogden's one contained other content to round it off. So it was a much more rounded article. So Ogden and Friends, better than Marcotti, but both worth reading. Is that political enough for you?
I thought you were going to sit in the fence there. I thought you were going to sit.
No, not at all. I'm going Ogden and Friends.
I had one question from Mark. We were talking about the Real Madrid at the start. And I know he's 34, but has Karim Benzema's brilliant continuing form, did that play into the mind, do you think, of Erling Haaland's decision to sort of go to City, bearing in mind, he's not going to play forever, but he's probably playing better than he ever has still and carries that team. Do you think that factored in at all?
I think it definitely did. I think if you go and play with Mbappe, I think they can play together. I think Mbappe plays out wide and Haaland plays through the middle. But I think you're right. Benzema's had such a great season. He's probably one of the favourites for the Ballon d'Or, which these young players definitely want. So I think Benzema's got at least a year or 2 left in him. So if you're Erling Haaland, you're thinking, well, I'm not going to play with Benzema. Nobody plays with the 4-4-2 anymore. So he may have looked at that and thought it's not the right move for me at this moment in time. But I can't overstate how many people close to Haaland and the deal was saying that he just wants to go to Real Madrid. Man United pulled out for many reasons, obviously being that they're nowhere near competitive enough. But one of the reasons they pulled out is because they were told December, January time that he wants to go to Real Madrid. So United moved on, had other issues to address. But, City have done well to stop him going to Madrid. But I think you're right, the Benzema factor certainly plays into this.
I'll go back. I'll answer,
thank you, Burley.
I'll answer your question now. I'll try and answer it. I think it, you said would the sign of Haaland just obliterate the rest of the Premier League? We don't really know. Mark might know better than me, but what's going to happen at Chelsea with new ownership and new money? I would imagine early on, to please the fans in particular, and how they would spend. They're probably going to spend big at the start. Whether that continues, like Abramovich, over a 20-year period, or give or take, that remains to be seen. But I think the answer to the question in terms of Man City and Liverpool is kind of dependent on Liverpool as well. And don't forget that squad with the signing of Diaz now is now bolstered as a front 5. So that's unlikely to go away unless they lose Mane or Salah or whatever. I know there's been talk about some clubs, interested in those. There was I heard somebody mention Bayern Munich and Sadio Mane and so forth. Of course, big clubs are always going to be interested in these elite players. But Klopp's not going away, signed a new deal. They won't get the backing that City will get from the ownership, but they'll get money. But they've already proven they can spend it wisely and have spent it wisely. So I don't think it's as simple as saying Haaland's here as great a player as he is, and that's it. Liverpool are just not going to catch them. Liverpool are a brilliant side, and barring a disaster, they're just not going to go away.
I think, can I just add to that? I think that 2 points of the Chelsea situation. I think we don't know about Chelsea. You're right. And I think Chelsea's problem this season is that by the time the takeover happens, we're looking at the end of May, beginning of June. They're going to be behind. They're going to be behind clubs that have already got deals lined up. So they're going to be playing catch up, and they have issues to address in the sense of what happens to Lukaku. Can they get him out? What happens to Werner? So I think Chelsea's summer is going to be disrupted by the fact they've missed a month, 2 months to prepare. The new owners will, they'll be like going to a washing machine. They want what's hit them when they get in there and they find they've got to do this, they've got to do that, contracts, incomings, outgoings. So I think Chelsea have got a problem this summer because they've just lost pace with everybody else. And let's be honest, they've had a pretty poor recent run. So they've got issues to address there. And in terms of, the Premier League itself, Man City have scored over 130 goals this season. They're not going to score 180 next year because they signed Haaland. So
no.
the 20 odd goals that Riyad Mahrez have scored, the goals that Sterling scored, and players like that, Bernardo Silva, I'd imagine that Haaland will take maybe 10 goals away from each of those. And all of a sudden, so Haaland might get 30, but Mahrez, Sterling, etc., De Bruyne will score fewer. So maybe it's the big games where City have fallen short, where they've not had that extra dimension that Haaland will make a difference. But they're not going to be scoring bucketful more goals. And we've seen this before. I mean, Craig will, we remember that, when United had Ruud van Nistelrooy, brilliant striker, they actually didn't win as many titles or trophies with Van Nistelrooy in the team as he did before or after, because United became much more predictable with Van Nistelrooy. Everything went through him and teams found a way to stop them. It wasn't until he left and Ferguson brought in, Rooney, Ronaldo, Sahar, that they had a different dimension. So, City will have to change the way they play to accommodate Haaland. Haaland will have to change the way he plays to accommodate playing for City. So who knows that having to do that might actually diminish their effectiveness both ways, because City like to play a passing game. Haaland likes to play on the counter-attack in transition, attacking space. So that doesn't really combine. I'm sure Guardiola will have a plan, but it doesn't mean they're going to be so dominant now because he's got them together. Clubs and coaches can work these players out, and no team has ever signed a player and become ultra dominant. Look at the Galacticos at Real Madrid. They had the best squad of players in the world, and they didn't win the Champions League.
I think back to what Oggy was saying there is like, you want to beef up your goals, but you're not bringing Erling Haaland in to, score 10 past the 2 newly promoted clubs. And, when you're winning 4-0, away at somebody who's just come up from the Championship or somebody who's in the bottom 6 of the league, and you bash a couple of goals in. Yeah, I mean, it's fine, it's all well and fine. But you go back to, I think, as Mark was saying, it's for key moments. I mean, you look at, they've gone through the full repertoire, Man City, in recent years of different ways to get blown out of the Champions League knockout stages. The latest obviously being in Madrid. Now, almost all of these games, they've completely outplayed their opponents. But in some sense, they've not killed them off. And yeah, they scored 4 goals against Real Madrid in that 4-3 game at the Etihad. But that game really should have been completely dead and buried. Yeah, there was 1 or 2 defensive mistakes that allowed those Real Madrid goals and them to hang in. But even at that, the chances they created with, somebody who is more clinical, the tie would have been over. It could have been 6. It should have been 6. And so it's these moments, because City, I just feel under this manager, whilst their defensive record is generally pretty good and they've got good defenders, it just seems that when it gets to the crunch, particularly in the UEFA Champions League, they make some basic mistakes at the back. And to cover for those mistakes, you need to be clinical up front. And I think that could be the difference.
Well, sometimes they leave themselves too open. I mean, you look at Man City and Liverpool. We've spoken about how good they are and how far clear they are of the rest. I can pretty much guarantee you that certainly in most games, maybe every game this season, that either Ederson or Alisson has had a one-on-one to try and deal with. Now, on the majority of times, they've actually saved that. But that's the way they play. By the way, there's one little nugget, Oggy, in your article, which I love. The fact that Erling Haaland was born when his father, Alf Inga, was a Manchester City player, which is a lovely nugget. Another nugget I want to speak to you two about, and it's to do with a dear friend of ours, sadly no longer with us, Paul Mariner. Now, in Paul's book, Steve Walsh, who was the director of football at Leicester when they won the league, then went on to Everton. Steve tells the story about being in the boardroom with a contract already agreed opposite him in the boardroom was Erling Haaland and a young Erling Haaland, who was at Molde at the time. Everything had been agreed. He was in to sign the contract. And Farhad Mashiri, according to Steve Walsh, came in, had a couple of questions, wasn't happy, tore up the deal. So from there, obviously, he went to Austria, then to Germany. So the path is it's been mapped out ahead of time for Erling Haaland. So is this a move that leads to Real Madrid, or is it a move that leads to him continuing to stay at Man City, as you said in your article, Mark, that Pep Guardiola came and wasn't sure if he was going to sign a new deal, loved it so much, signed an extension, then another one. Do you think that might happen with Erling Haaland? Or do you think his future has already been mapped out and that would include Real Madrid? Or is it not as easy as that?
Well, first of all, in the Everton story, I actually know the scout who spotted him, and he told me that story himself, and he was pulling his hair out at the time that this had actually happened, that he was about to sign for Dortmund. He would just burst out of the scene in the Champions League with Salzburg, and he said, told me that story. So yeah, Everton could have had Erling Haaland. It's one of those near misses, isn't it? That you're not,
Augie, you're not suggesting Everton have got a bad recruitment policy.
But they got good scouts, they just don't listen to them.
They don't listen, yeah.
But in terms of his career mapped out, I spoke to his dad. I spoke to Alfie a couple of years ago when he was at Salzburg, and he told me that when they make the moves, and there was certainly a plan in place, when they make the moves, it would not be about the club. It would be at the club, the manager, and this horrible word, philosophy. You know, that what the project, as he says. But so it's the whole package. It's not, they weren't just going to sign for a club because it's the club. Because if the manager's not safe or secure, then it wouldn't work out. So they've gone for this blue chip at City, isn't it? Man City trophies, Pep Guardiola. Now, the kind of the crunch point here is the Real Madrid thing, like you say, because it was reported last week that City would sacrifice Haaland, 4 or 5 years down the line and say, look, happily go to Real Madrid, you're giving us 4 or 5 years, off you go. There's no way in the world that's going to happen. Man United happened with Cristiano Ronaldo. So Alex Ferguson managed to keep him for an extra year, but he was always going to Real Madrid. But Ronaldo's from Portugal, so there's obviously a connection there. There's not that connection with Haaland and with Spain. And I think when it comes to 4 or 5 years down the line, there's no way that City are going to let him go to Real Madrid. Not when he's in 25, 26, at the peak of his career, unless he's managed to insert another release clause, which you don't know about. There may be a release clause in his contract which says that will happen, but I think he's at City for the rest of his career now, because City, so much money, so much ambition. They'll say, look, why do you want to go there? We'll just pay you more money. So I'd be very surprised if he leaves Man City at any time in his 20s.
But I think that also comes down to the fact that, that is dependent, I suppose, Mark, in terms of how long the manager stays there.
Dependent on a lot of things, Craig, isn't it?
Well, let's not kid ourselves. These two clubs are bashing heads at the moment. Liverpool historically, obviously, a bigger club. City, a big club, but yo-yoed between many divisions until they got unbelievable investment and then moved to the Etihad. But let's not kid ourselves. These two clubs are where they are generally, not just because of money, because they have the two best coaches on the planet at the moment. And there are, of course, there are other good coaches out there, but I don't think anybody really comes close to those two at the moment. And I think it is a concern that, one day they're going to leave, and who is the incumbent, and what does that look like? And, we've seen what it's like at Man United and others. It's not just about money. You can go out there, you're talking about Everton, they haven't spent in that bracket, but they've still spent a lot, and look where they are because they've spent poorly. So I think a lot of these things depends on, we're talking about Haaland's future and how long at City and stuff. We just don't know what's around the corner in terms of where they'll be in 4 or 5 years, because we know what the manager's like. I think the likelihood of him being there in that time frame is unlikely. And so, that plays a big part in a player's decision as well.
And Man City, sorry, Mark, over the years, Man City, certainly since the takeover, they don't let players go. I mean, Sergio Aguero could have gone a couple of times to Barcelona, didn't go. City too powerful. Kevin De Bruyne has probably had offers to go. I remember even when Carlos Tevez was unhappy, they just wouldn't let him go. They're such a powerful club now, City, that you've got to have a very good reason to leave. And I think the only two that stand out to me are Leroy Sané, who went back to Bayern Munich, and Jerome Boateng, the same thing. And, 2 German internationals left to go back to Germany. You can see why there's a pull to go back home. But, if City want to dig the heels in, unless he's got a release clause, I think he's there for the rest of his career. Now, and just on that point, and when Man United had him in the room back in 2019, it was December 2019, they had him in the room, Solskjaer met him, went over to Norway to meet him. That fell down because United wouldn't agree to a release clause in his contract. Now, for me, that was one of the biggest mistakes, alongside Everton not taking him as a kid. If you're Man United and you have to put a release clause in with a player, obviously you're not happy with it, but surely you've got to back yourself thinking, right, we're Man United, we'll bring Erling Haaland in. In 2 years' time, we'll say to him, look, don't leave Man United, we'll double your money, or we'll do whatever. Stay here because you're leading us back into where we want to be. They should have backed themselves to have the finances and the ambition to keep him at the club. But they blew it, absolutely blew it. And they're never getting Erling Haaland now.
Craig, Mark mentioned Kevin De Bruyne. Now, Kevin De Bruyne is going to be licking his lips at being able to provide service for Erling Haaland. And Haaland himself be like, my goodness, I've got Kevin De Bruyne providing service for me. And he's the one transfer that all the top clubs wanted. And he's gone to Manchester City. That's all the positives. Is there any way that this doesn't work out? Because Augie mentioned that City will have to tweak their style at times for Ogden. You couldn't afford him. For Haaland. And Haaland might have to tweak his style a little bit for City. So is there any way that this transfer doesn't work out, in your opinion, Craig?
Augie's release clause from ESPN is a little bit less, I believe.
Not much, though.
No, I don't think so. I think injuries. Because I think that's the only thing, really. He's going to score goals. He's natural. He's so powerful. I mean, he's those big broad shoulders, bashing defenders around. He's got a great touch. He's fast. Teams will defend deep against City, but it gives them another angle to throw earlier balls into the box. We don't tend to see them doing that a lot. We tend to see them overplay sometimes, which I think gets a little frustrating. But so that'll be an avenue to throw some early balls into the box. They've got some really good crossers from those front guys, even and the fullbacks. So now they've got an option to do that, and he can go and attack it. The earlier point I think that Mark was making away earlier was, about the injuries and stuff. And that's the thing. City are not. They've already shown the last 2 years they're not reliant on a striker, but they've chased a striker because it gives them an extra option. So they're not reliant on Haaland. It's not like they're going to have to play him, as Mark was saying, every game. Now, how the player deals with that's a different argument. That's always difficult for a player. But in terms of if he's picked up an injury or he's out for a month or whatever, it isn't, as strange as it to say this, it isn't greatly going to affect him because they've already shown they can do it without. They can do it another way. So it just gives them an extra string to their bow. And I can't, for those reasons, see any other. And having watched him over the last couple of years, I can't see any other reason that he's not going to bash a lot of goals in the Premier League. There's a lot of average teams in the Premier League. There's a lot of poor defenders in the Premier League. Let's not kid ourselves. It sells itself as a very good product. And there are some very good players and obviously some top teams. But there's a lot of average ones and poor ones that don't have good defenders. And he's just going to have a field day with them like he did and does with some of the teams in the Bundesliga.
I want to wrap this up by looking ahead to next season, Erling Haaland's first in the Premier League. I was going through some of the bookies' odds this morning on how they think he'll get on. There's not too many odds up as yet, so it's always the dangerous one. If you're first in, what do you go with? And the odds I saw, I thought were very generous, were for City to win the league and Haaland to be top scorer in the Premier League next season was 8-1, which was just far too generous, in my opinion, because, look, we've seen him growing up, Craig, in Austria when he was in the Champions League and the Bundesliga that we commentate on, and he has the potential to take this league by storm. So the prediction I want you both to make is this. I'm going to give you 25 goals for Erling Haaland next season, his first in England. Are you taking the over 25 goals or are you taking the under? Let's start with Craig first.
Well, I'm not taking Lukaku as top scorer. I'm not taking a resurgence in that if indeed he's even still at Chelsea. But I'm going over. I'm going over 25 for Erling Haaland in his first year.
Okay, Augie.
Yeah, I think you have to go over, and I think I think there'll be some games next season where he could score 5 or 6, and I'm saying that because he's a greedy striker, and that's a good thing. I think when he played for Norway as a kid, he scored 9.
He got 9, remember?
Yeah, but he's one of those players that just wants to score goals, and you don't really have many of those anymore. They're kind of the classic goal poachers, but he's more than a poacher. But I just think if he doesn't come off a pitch having scored 3 or 4 goals, he won't be happy. So he will bully teams. He will try and get silly amounts of goals, 5 and 6, and it might be a bit unseemly to watch at times if he's doing that, but I think he'll smash some teams. So I think he will score over 25 goals. But as Craig said earlier on about it's the difference he makes in the big games against Liverpool, against Real Madrid, against Bayern Munich. So that's what they've bought him for. So if he scores 25 goals in the Premier League and he scores 5 goals against the Liverpools and the Tottenhams and the Chelseas, then that will make it a good deal. If he scores 25 against Burnley and Newcastle, then it's not what they've bought him for.
And I suppose, Craig, the other thing is as well, if you've got someone like Haaland in opposition, you might have to double team him at times. So that could leave space for some of the other talented players at City. So this will be a conundrum for opposition managers as well in England about how to deal with them.
Well, I mean, he's a straight-up sort of player, isn't he? I mean, as Oggy says, he bullies defenders, and he's bigger than he's going to be bigger than most of the centre halves. To be quite frank with you, he's a bit of a monster. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult enough to deal with City anyway in the movement. But I don't see what you can do in terms of trying to adjust your setup to deal with them. You're either playing a 3 at the back or you're playing a 4 at the back. So your centre halves are going to have to deal with it. Somebody's going to pick him up with balls coming in the box, and you're going to have to deal with his runs in behind if you play a higher line, because he's fast. We've seen him score numerous goals at Dortmund where he's ran from the halfway line or just inside it through on 1-on-1s. He's quite prepared to run in behind as well. He's not a big guy who just likes to play with his back to goal, where he takes it in his chest and he lays it off and they knock it wide, they knock it in the box. He's happy to spin in behind, and he's got a fair amount of pace as well. So trust me, there's going to be a lot to deal with.
Can I just ask Craig from a pro's perspective? I mean, do you see a weakness in his game? Because the one thing that some people have said is that in Germany he does like to attack the space, whereby he'll run at defenders who back off. Now, in the Premier League, that he might find it a little bit tighter than that. Has he got a weakness that he could exploit and kind of try and benefit from?
I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, maybe he's still a bit one-footed to a certain extent, but there's been a lot of players, Mark, that have been. You look at Messi, you've seen him, a bit left-footed. That lad, he's never going to make it. Yeah, I suppose there's. I think one of the things is he is still young, and as he makes these moves, the pressure ratchets up. Look, Dortmund are a great club, but they've not been in the running really down to in the title race in Dortmund. I mean, they've hung about for a few seasons. They've not been in the running for Champions Leagues, recently. So the pressure there is limited.
Well, the pressure might be limited to an extent in Germany. However, when it comes to the English Premier League, the scrutiny and the pressure will certainly be there. But from what we've seen so far in Erling Haaland's career, and remember, he doesn't turn 22 until this summer. This is a kid that will just shrug the pressure off his shoulders and get on with it and put the ball in the back of the net.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.